The old man arrived every morning before anyone else. The school gates were still half asleep, the corridors cold and echoing with the silence of things unspoken. His name was Mr. Min-kai. To some, he was just the aging math teacher whose words came slower with the years, whose eyes seemed to look past the chalkboard and into something far away. To others, very few, he was a man who once wore a uniform, bore medals not on his chest but deep in his spine, where pain had long since settled. His classroom was tucked at the far end of the school, a forgotten corner where the ceiling paint peeled like tired memories and the windows clung to dust no one bothered to wipe away. Students passed by his door without glancing in. Some whispered, some smirked. Old man still here? What's he even doing teaching? He doesn't even yell. Easy class, easy grade. The mockery was casual, careless, the way youth sometimes dances on the bones of dignity without even noticing the sound it makes. Mr. Kai never responded. Not with scolding, not with sarcasm, not even with a sigh. He simply stood at the board, wrote equations in clean, slow strokes, and taught as though someone in the room was still listening. But he knew that most students weren't taking notes. They were taking advantage. Some scrolled through their phones, some whispered without bothering to hide it. One had once called him a walking antique to his face. He only nodded. That silence, some mistook for weakness. But silence, like still water, can hide deep things. He lived alone in a narrow apartment filled with old books and older photographs, most of them in uniform, most of them without smiles. He never spoke of his past, though some staff suspected. There were rumors, some called him a war hero, others thought that was nonsense. He never confirmed anything. He didn't need to. Once, a fellow teacher asked him during lunch, "Why do you stay here? You could have retired years ago." He looked out the window where the students were laughing, loud and thoughtless in the yard, and said quietly, "Maybe I'm just waiting for one of them to ask a question that matters." That winter was colder than usual. Something about the wind felt brittle, like the world was ready to break at any moment. Mr. Kai noticed that the laughter in the hallways had changed. Not louder, just sharper, like knives wrapped in plastic. He noticed two boys watching him in class too often, too closely, not with curiosity but calculation. Still, he said nothing. He went home, prepared his next lesson, sharpened his chalk, polished the cuffs of his worn-out shirt. He walked into school the next day as he always did, early, steady, silent. And he did not know that by the time he would leave that classroom again, blood would be on his face, cameras would be rolling, and the internet would soon be screaming his name for all the wrong reasons. But that morning, the sun was just rising, and he was just a teacher, still hoping someone, somewhere, might learn something worth remembering. It began with a whisper, but not the kind that carries secrets. This whisper was venomous, passed between students with smirks and half-laughed phrases, as if planning a prank was sport and cruelty had no consequence. Two boys, Trung and Kwa, had chosen their target weeks ago. They were the kind that schools often fail to see clearly, bright enough to blend in, cruel enough to lead. They lived in a world where humiliation could be filmed and fame came in likes and shares. And Mr. Kai, quiet, old, solitary, was the perfect prey. It started subtly, a paper plane with profanity gliding across his desk in the middle of a lesson. He picked it up, unfolded it carefully, read the words, then folded it back with the precision of origami and placed it inside his drawer. He said nothing. The class laughed. That silence, that maddening, measured silence, only fueled their games. They escalated. Someone unplugged his projector just before a lesson. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to fix it, still calm, still silent. They recorded it, uploaded it, captioned it. When a dinosaur tries to use tech face with tears of joy, the views climbed. Comments poured in like acid rain. Put him in a museum already. Why is he still teaching? Sat. Let the man rest. He looks half dead. He saw it. Of course he did. Someone printed the comments and left them on his desk. He looked at the pages, nodded once, and placed them beneath the math tests he was grading. Then came the day of the exam. Trung arrived late, headphones in, swaggering like a boy who believed the rules weren't made for him. Mr. Kai said nothing, just pointed to an empty seat. Qua joined a few minutes later, chewing gum. Their plan had already been set in motion: cheat on the test, mock the teacher when caught, and record it all for one final exposé. Mr. Kai watched them whisper. Watched the phone under the desk. Watched the deceit unfold in front of him. And when he slowly walked over and placed his hand on the paper with the stolen answers, Trung stood up. "Don't touch my stuff, old man." The words hit like a slap in the silence. Every head turned. The room froze. Qua stood up too, phone already recording. "What's wrong, sir? Afraid someone finally called you out?" The moment stretched, breathless. Mr. Kai didn't shout. He didn't scold. He simply looked at them, something cold and ancient in his gaze, like a man who had seen worse than defiance. "I am not afraid of being insulted," he said, voice steady. "But I am afraid you will grow up thinking this is strength." Trung shoved the desk. "Don't talk to me like I'm your kid." And then, too fast, too sudden, he struck him. A single blow. Not enough to knock him down, but enough to leave a red mark across the old man's face. Gasps. Screams. Phones held high, like weapons of another kind. The room erupted. And Mr. Kai just stood there. Blood slowly traced the corner of his lip. He wiped it with a handkerchief, so old it still bore a faint military insignia. He looked around, not with fear, not with anger, but with something infinitely more haunting: disappointment. Then he turned and walked out. The footage hit the internet within the hour. The title was cruel, efficient, viral. Teacher gets slapped, does nothing. Comment sections flooded with outrage, some defending the teacher, most mocking him. The school panicked. The principal called an emergency meeting. Parents demanded answers. The ministry got involved. But Mr. Kai said nothing. He stayed home the next day. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't show up. The classroom felt colder, smaller. And even the boys who had filmed him couldn't explain why they felt the silence was heavier now, like the room itself knew something had been broken that couldn't be fixed. No one had expected the old man to fight back. But no one expected him to vanish either. They had filmed his humiliation. What they didn't know was that the reckoning had already begun. The internet doesn't breathe, it devours. And that day, it devoured Mr. Kai. By the time the sun dipped behind the school's rooftop, the video had gone from a local scandal to a national circus. A shaky, vertical clip only 30 seconds long, but more than enough. The hashtags burned through timelines like wildfire. Hashtag old man slapped. Hashtag teacher shame. Hashtag why he did nothing. It was everywhere. News channels replayed it with blurred faces and bold red banners. Commentators on talk shows shook their heads while sipping tea and declared, "This is what happens when teachers lose control." But they didn't know the man in the video. They only saw a caricature, a symbol. Weak. Pathetic. Outdated. One anchor even dared to say, maybe he should have retired a decade ago. But then something shifted. A former student, unknown, anonymous, posted a thread. "You don't know Mr. Kai like we did. Let me tell you who he really is." And he told them about how Mr. Kai used to bring rice porridge to a student who came to school hungry. How he fixed a girl's broken sandal with duct tape and humility so she wouldn't walk barefoot home. How he stayed behind every Friday to clean the blackboard even when the janitor forgot. How he never raised his voice. Never once. Even when they failed him. Even when the world turned unkind. Others followed. Threads, posts, messages, testimonials, like a flood of memory and truth, washing over the toxic narrative. He taught me math, but he also taught me dignity. That man showed up to my dad's funeral when no one else did. He gave me his old raincoat because I didn't have one. And then came the photo. An old, grainy picture posted by a military page. A younger Mr. Kai, face smudged with dirt, uniform crisp, eyes focused, carrying a wounded comrade through jungle terrain. Former Special Forces. Silver Star recipient. Refused promotion to stay a teacher. Hero in silence. The narrative collapsed. The comment sections flipped. Anger turned to awe. The same people who had laughed now asked for forgiveness. Apologies swarmed his empty Facebook profile like digital candles. Artists drew tributes. Students he hadn't seen in decades begged him to come back. An online petition titled "Bring Back Mr. Kai, with Respect" gathered thousands of signatures within hours. Influencers who had mocked him scrambled to issue apologies. And Trung and Kwa? They became pariahs overnight. Their faces, though blurred in the original video, were quickly uncovered. The internet rarely forgets, and never forgives easily. The school was forced to respond. A press conference was held. The principal stood, trembling, reading from a paper. "We regret the incident. We deeply admire Mr. Kai's decades of service. We are actively, it didn't matter." The world had already taken sides. The students, too, began to murmur. Some with guilt, some with shame. Some who had once ignored Mr. Kai now felt the absence, like a missing heartbeat. And in the middle of this whirlwind, Mr. Kai remained silent. He didn't post, didn't reply, didn't explain himself. But the silence wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't defeat. It was control. The kind of control a soldier learns. The kind of strength that doesn't need a shout. And the world, so loud, so quick to judge, began to understand that maybe the truest kind of power wasn't in a raised fist or a trending post, but in the quiet defiance of dignity. He didn't return to class. Not yet. But a single photo was leaked days later. Mr. Kai in a garden, tending to bonsai with delicate hands. A scar faintly visible under his eye. The caption read, "The storm will pass. The roots remain." And with that, the internet exhaled. They had tried to erase him, but instead, they resurrected a legend. The school gate creaked in the wind, the rusted hinges groaning like a memory. Inside, the courtyard remained unchanged, faded paint on the flagpole, dusty windows reflecting tired sunlight, and rows of benches waiting for someone who might never return. It had been weeks since the incident. Weeks since the video. Since the silence. Since Mr. Kai had simply walked away. In his absence, everything had grown sharper. The classroom he once ruled with restraint now felt orphaned. No one dared sit in his chair. The board remained half-erased, as if even the chalk couldn't bring itself to forget his presence. The students whispered still, less with cruelty now, more with confusion, and something that almost resembled guilt. Trung was no longer loud. He didn't swagger anymore. The attention had melted into something far colder than infamy, shame. His parents pulled him out of school for a week, but when he returned, he looked smaller somehow. He had taken down his social media. He didn't argue with teachers. He didn't look anyone in the eye. But sometimes, when no one was watching, he would stop by the empty staff room door, glance inside, and quietly walk away. Kwa had stopped recording. He now carried books. Real ones. Not for show. Not for mocking. Just reading. He hadn't said sorry, not out loud, but the cameras were gone. The silence from them, at last, was sincere. And what of Mr. Kai? He did not come back to teach. But his presence lingered like perfume in a closed drawer. Rumors drifted like autumn leaves. Some said he had gone north to visit the grave of an old war comrade. Others claimed he'd returned to the village where he once built schools with his bare hands. A few said he sat in a tea house each morning with a notebook, quietly writing, as if trying to stitch his years into something lasting. But no one knew for sure. What they did know was this. He had changed something. Not just in the boys who had hurt him. Not just in the school that failed him. But in all of them. In the country's endless scroll of distractions, his story, his silence, had stopped people. Made them pause. Made them feel. And that is a kind of revolution not easily forgotten. Then one morning something strange happened. A package arrived at the school office, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a single object, a lesson planner. Old, leather-bound, worn soft with age. Tucked between the pages, a note written in neat, careful strokes. Strength is not in retaliation. It is in restraint. Dignity does not scream. It endures. I forgive you. Now become worthy of that forgiveness. No signature. But everyone knew. The planner was placed in the school's library, behind glass. A new rule was added. First-year students would learn his story. Not because he was famous, but because he stood for something the world was forgetting. And still, on certain afternoons, when the sun dipped just right and the wind carried the smell of chalk and old wood, a few students claimed they saw a shadow passing through the back corridor. Tall, steady, with hands behind his back. Maybe it was just memory playing tricks. Or maybe the legend never really left. Because some men don't need to stay to remain. They simply become part of the silence that changes everything.